Wonderful. Well, let's get started. It's 7:35. I'm sure more people will be joining us, but let's just begin. So it's great to see you all here. And we're all so familiar. We'll just hand it right over to Jeya and she'll take it away.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, thanks, everyone. I commend you for sticking with it. And I hope that it has been fun to be with me. It has been such a pleasure and an honor to be with all of you for the last now 4 weeks. And I just want to thank you for spending in total or in part these last 4 weeks and for your thoughtful engagement with the presentations. And so today, my hope is to give some tools that I hope will help cultivate your teams for sustainability. And I'll just say it again, that teams are your greatest tool towards sustainability, financial or otherwise. And so in the first week, we talked about the importance of team and particularly of Team You, right? Who is the team that you have gathered around you as a leader, or and who are the people who help you in the ministry that you do, whether they're part of it or not? Who are the load-bearing leaders that are on this journey with you? And then the second week, we took a look at getting creative with what you have and looked at asset-based leadership development. And when we look at sustainability, asset-based leadership development encourages us to look at what we have before we look at what we don't have or what we think we need. And so then when we look at what we have, we are asked to get creative with it, right? And so what we're doing is we're connecting micro assets to the macro environment. And then last week, we spoke of the importance of storytelling and training your team to tell the stories of your church to build trust. And so we talked about narrative budgets and how we can deploy our teams to tell the stories within these budgets so that they might invite others to participate in the life of the church. And so in our final week together, as I mentioned, I want to wrap up our time by really digging into creativity with our teams and practice some creative exercises and tell some stories that I hope will help us to think creatively. And before I do, I just want to name something that it is. I've been with a couple of different church leaders around the US the last couple of days. And we've been talking about what a strange time it is right now post-COVID. COVID felt like this, like we were just trying to just keep it going, right? Let's just hang in there. And now there's this opportunity to see where are we going? But even through that, right? And even before that, I think perhaps there's this sense of of weariness, perhaps even discouragement, right? Even pre-COVID, our church, and many churches were struggling with declining numbers. Other churches maybe had aging buildings. Many churches were struggling with dwindling resources. COVID exacerbated some of these challenges and they brought out new ones. And we realized that the world is rapidly changing. The way that people are engaging faith or not engaging faith is rapidly changing. And so we're having to innovate while also trying to maintain, and that's tiring, right? It's time to get creative, right? But it's also just trying to figure out in the midst of that, how we care well for ourselves and one another. And so even as we think about creativity, if there's one thing I've learned in trying to pastor my little community through the pandemic, is that creativity is exhausting, right? Only God can create something from nothing. And even God rested on the seventh day, granted for reasons probably that are different from ours. But, I really thank God that God set that example, because it means that you and I can rest too. So I pray that as we start discussing some things today, that you all can be gentle with yourselves and that you are surrounding yourselves with people who can remind you of that. And because we're going to be talking about creativity, I also want to say this: creativity takes a lot of work. I know that's why actually many leaders come to gatherings like this, because even more than inspiration, what we're sometimes looking for, and I know I do this myself, is we're just looking for that magic solution, right? The wand that we can wave, something that I've heard often people say, I just need something to plug and play, and I need it to fix our problems, which I definitely understand. But even with those kinds of situations, you often have to adapt them for your particular context. And so you have to get creative. And so I just really want to encourage you that in this time to keep pushing into and pressing into your creativity, and in the midst of that, to also care for yourself well, right? And so one of the ways that we're going to do that is we're going to bring it back to team. As a pastor, I know that sometimes being a pastor can be lonely. I read a statistic a while back that 70% of pastors do not have one person that they could consider a close friend. But a church was never meant to be one person visionary, right? Church is it's a called out community. And so last year, as I went on a soul searching journey after experiencing like really incredible burnout, I was really questioning whether or not this was the end for our church. It was the team of leaders who came together and they said they still believed in our ministry, in our vision, and they kept saying, this is ours, this is ours. And if it wasn't for the fact that we together discerned that we should continue, I don't think that we would be like sustaining to this day. And I realized and knew that it wasn't just my decision whether or not we should continue on, but one that I had the privilege of making together with our team. And I also realized, like, even should I decide that perhaps this was the end for me, that our team could together decide whether or not it was the end for just myself or for this group together. And so team has been so important, particularly in these last couple of years. And so the more we can decentralize and share that leadership, the wider that we can make that base, the greater we can distribute this load. And so if we can consider who might be members of our team in a creative way, then we can expand our team by that much more. And so I want to share a couple of stories with you. This is a photo of the sanctuary of Ormwood Church in a neighborhood of Atlanta, Georgia. In 2015, there was a church, Ormwood Park Presbyterian Church, that closed its doors, and the over 100-year building was empty. And so the presbytery was trying to decide, what do we do with this property, right? And, they had all these ideas. There was talk within the presbytery of what to do. And then what they decided to do was they decided to hold potluck gatherings, inviting members of the community who lived or worked within the proximity of the church to come to these meetings. And they held a series of meetings of people who had never been a part of Ormwood Park Presbyterian to come and talk about what were their thoughts on what to do with this property. And some of those present, actually, they were pretty surprised, because what they thought that they were coming to was a meeting where the presbytery was going to say, hey, neighbors, this is what we're going to do with this property. And, we're just informing you. And so when they realized that actually they were being asked to give their opinion of what this property was going to be used for, they felt like somehow they were being invited into a team, right? Into this team, right? And so they gathered together not just that once, but several times. And together as a community, they learned, discussed, and dreamed about what the space could be. And what ended up happening was a new worshiping community came into that space. And then so much more, right? The church became a hub for community. Children learned how to ride their bikes there. People gathered with their dogs in the dog park and being good neighbors to the wider community of Ormwood Park. And so I love the vision that the presbytery had to widen their team even outside of people who are part of the Presbyterian system. They said, and this was just for a short time. And this is what I mean, like some teams, right? They don't have to be forever, right? In fact, that's burdensome. But if you say, we're inviting you into this vision as part of the team, and you're holding this burden with us together, even for a short time, or even for a given time, then what we're really doing is we're sharing and shouldering that load. So then it's not just Presbyterians who feel like this building is their responsibility, but altogether the community is coming together to hold responsibility for this property. And so by genuinely asking thoughts and opinions, the leaders of the Ormwood Church were able to build trust and invite participation. And I think that people began to see that there was value in the church being there. As we started our church, one of our leaders brought up that they thought it would be a good idea to partner with outside organizations. The church that he had kind of grown up in, they were always just starting things on their own, which was good, right? Which was fine. But he was saying there's so many organizations outside of our own ministry capacities that are out there and that are good. So instead of just staying within ourselves, could we expand our team, right? And see what else is out there? How could we together partner and team up with other organizations that were already doing good work in San Diego, even if they weren't faith organizations, right? I know that it's not new, like many churches already do this, but if we really stop and think about, like, rethink about team. I wonder what would happen if we considered these folks as part of our team and the mutuality that could happen. Not only are we partnering with these organizations, but they might be partnering with us, right? And seeing the direction of how we're doing our faith and spiritual formation. And so I want to ask, are there people outside of our churches that might be invited to part of our teams? Even as I talk about decentralizing and widening our teams, I want to remind everyone that it's not about having large numbers for your teams, right? This is a sidewalk that leads to Storehouse Grocers in the Dayton Bluffs neighborhood of St. Paul, Minnesota. And it's here that I should apologize that all of my examples are from the US. I have said that my knowledge of Canada is limited but growing. And so hopefully, I know that there's some grace there, but this again is Storehouse Grocers and Coffee in Dayton's Bluff of St. Paul. It's a ministry and a business run by Faith City Church. They are about 30 members strong. But not only do they have this for-profit micro grocery working to fight food insecurity in their neighborhood, they also have a vision for their church to solve the problem of food insecurity within their neighborhood. And so the vision for the church was to be a church that feeds soul and body. And again, this church is only 30 people. And so my husband asked, how is our church able to start and maintain Storehouse Grocers, right? And their pastor answered that it's because they know who they are and they know how to share and invite people into this vision, right? Whether they're members of this 30-member church or outside of it. And so it was this reminder, you don't need hundreds of people to be on your team. You don't need hundreds of people to start wonderful ministries like this, but you do need a good team. And in that way, you can solve the needs of your community. And so this is just a reminder, right, that teams are biblical, right? Jesus sent the disciples 2 by 2. Right? Paul's missionary journeys names the people that he took with them. And so I just want to name a couple of practices that will help build teams and help teams get creative for the sustainability of our ministries and churches. Right? So let's start here. The first one is to pray together. And of course, that feels very like, of course, right? We should pray. We're churches. We should pray together. But perhaps there's some creative ways to do this so that you're building team through prayer throughout the week. So for a time, our church together, and in particular our leaders, we set our alarms for 10:02, which is for Luke 10, chapter 2. And every night, we would set our alarms, and then we all stopped whatever we were doing, wherever we were, to pray for our church. And it wasn't long either. We just, we didn't say like you have to pray for half an hour. We said, just when your alarm goes off, can you just pray for a minute or two? There was this really awful incident actually where I was at a Yo-Yo Ma concert and Emmanuel acts, and I'd forgotten to turn off my alarm, and in a pause, 10:02 hit, and my alarm added to the concert. It was probably not a great reminder of it that it was time to pray, but it did happen, and I was like, it stuck in my brain forever that I pray at 10:02, and Yo-Yo Ma was really gracious and did not mention it at all, so it was good. But it was just gratifying to know that we were all praying together every night for the church. And I'll add that we didn't do this forever, so we're still not doing it. We had a season of praying together every night so that it didn't just become habit or ritual or something that could be dismissed. We said, for these couple of months, we're going to pray together at 10:02. And if you want to continue to do so, that's great. And if you don't, that's okay too. And so we had these start and end dates that we found were to be really helpful. And as it was for many of our church's practices, actually. So it was fun when we would be gathered together and everyone's alarm clocks went off at 10:02, right? So we would laugh because we would hear what everyone's alarm sounded like. And in those instances, we would pray together at 10:02 if we were together. And so that's the first thing, let's pray together. The second one that we had was that we created community together. And when we first started our church, our team would gather for really long meetings. And one day, one of our leaders told us this funny story. He was talking to somebody about our planning meetings and how sometimes he would gather for 6 hours for our planning meetings. And this person was like, oh my gosh, that sounds horrible. right? Like gathering for 6 hours together to do these planning meetings. Why so long? And he said, well, we eat dinner together, right? And we share in our life, we laugh a lot, and then we start planning. And while we're planning, we're still sharing in life and we're still laughing a lot, even as we get down to business. And it was really important that we worked hard to cultivate this culture because we wanted to make sure that everyone enjoyed being at these meetings, right? And so it just helped when we had to have like tough conversations to know we are cultivating community together as a team. The team isn't just for business, it is because we really care, we have relationships, and we're going to be able to do life together. So it was never just about the business, right? But the more important work was really gathering together as community, as a team, right? And so more than studies, more than data, it was this community building that helped our team to really take ownership and have reason to participate in the building and sustaining of our church together. And so when it took time to take some steps of faith, because we trusted one another, we were able to do that more easily. The next thing is to have fun together. I mentioned last week that an important lesson I'm living into these days is that creativity can be learned. It's because God is a creator, right? We're made in God's image. And so if we can make it an actual part of our work to play and practice creativity, then we can form the bridges in our brains, right? That will help us to find creative solutions within our churches, right? So growing our creativity encourages risk. It will help us to develop our faith muscles. So in our church meetings, we actually would do creative exercises before we would get to the business of our meeting. And so we would draw together, we would improv, we would play. And then it was really helpful, particularly when we were trying to do some brainstorming, to have our creative muscles already going so that we can make that bridge, right? And so we could then have this creative ideation going on while we were meeting. This is really important in our group because in our group we had a bunch of people who were really, really smart. And so what they would do is somebody would put forth an idea and say, what if we did this? And because everyone was so smart, immediately what would happen is, oh, well, here's an idea, here's this idea why it wouldn't work. And oh yeah, and then it wouldn't also work because of this. And so what happened was our really smart group would begin to say, here are the reasons that, this thing wouldn't be able to happen. And so then people would get kind of defeated. I mean, most of the reasons were legitimate, right? But then people began to feel discouraged to share ideas that felt too risky. And so then what we decided was that we would try our best to get to the yes if we could, right? And so one of the things that we started to do is we started to play improv games together. And we got used to being able to say yes, to build ideas off of each other rather than just shutting them down completely. And then when we had these ideas, instead of immediately thinking of why these ideas couldn't work, we began to see if we could make it work, right? And in the midst of that, even if the original idea couldn't work, we began to take these like twists and turns, and it would lead us into these new and creative spaces. And so it helped us to creatively get our message across because we had new angles. And so really, I cannot emphasize being creative enough, right? This is a time when the church needs to get creative, right? About a decade into ministry, as social media began to become more and more of a thing, I remember going to a leadership conference, and oftentimes the big idea for social media was hire a young social media intern, right? Get your 18-year-old nephew to volunteer. Hire young people for the tech team, but that can be discouraging if your church has a small budget, right? Where would you hire from? Or if your nephew lived thousands of kilometers away from you, where would you go, right? But then if we think about it creatively, we might think differently about social media in a way, right? Maybe we encourage our older people who are not used to it in our congregations to try it, right? And just see, maybe you come up with a whole new way of doing social media, or like a new design format that catches on, right? Or maybe you just decide you don't need it because what you really want to do is you want to do word of mouth, and that's going to become really important. That's where you're going to focus your energy. So Team Creatively is the answer to many of our church's problems, right? And so, for instance, in our church, Team Creativity was the answer to Sunday school. We knew we wouldn't have the money for a children's pastor, and so we had to come up with a program that would that would answer, because we started off with children. And so it actually led to a Sunday school program that got written up about and talked about in different like conferences and stuff as we did this co-op ministry. And it had to come from the team, right? And so just really want to emphasize creativity. Next, I want to talk about bringing your networks together, right? In many of the fundraising courses that I've taken, right? One of the things that we're taught to do in almost any fundraising class that I've been a part of is to think about 100 people who might be potential participants in the project you're raising funds for, right? So think of 100 people, write down the list, and then think of all these people that you're going to ask money for, right? And I remember thinking, I don't know if I have 100 people in this moment that I would be willing to reach out to ask for funding, right? And I remember like sitting in those classes and feeling a little bit like a loser, because like it felt like everyone else had 100 people and I did not, you know, and I just didn't know like what I could do. And I really tried, but I couldn't get there. And most of our leadership team, like if you ask them individually, they're in the same boat. And then culturally for us as a group of Asian Americans, right, it just felt different, like to ask for like our lesser known relationships for like this kind of ask for donating. But I realized if I individually can't think about 100 people and my team individually might not know 100 people, our team of 6 to 8 knew 100 people that we could ask, right? And so then I began to think a little bit differently about networking, right? And our collective abilities, right, to work as one. And so we make sure to make a time to bring up where people are seeing potential partnerships. And then we see who would be willing to create bridges of partnerships. And this has led to all sorts of resources that we have both received and contributed to. And so like collective power of network is something that I really want us to be thinking about. And so we're going to take some time to practice some of these things together, right? And so we're going to play some games. And then we'll come back together and we'll do some debriefing and some chatting there. But for the first one, I'll explain it and then we'll come back together and we'll talk about, let me see if yes, okay. So the first game is a game called What Is It, right? And it's a game to help us expand our perspective. We have these resources. I talked about asset-based leadership development. And so we're going to do an improv exercise where we're just trying to think differently. Okay, so you're going to pretend that you are aliens and that you have landed in this room and you are making discoveries, right? So you can grab an object that is around you, right? Anything. It does just whatever you have right in front of you, right? Like maybe you have this water bottle, right? I have a water bottle, right? And then what you're going to do is each person take turns displaying your object and asking, what is this, right? What is this? And everyone's going to take a turn guessing what the object might be, right? And so, you know, but it's whatever it is, it's not a water bottle, right? And so everyone is going to just take turns guessing what this might be. Hopefully that makes sense. The second game that we're going to play is, we call it the carrot cake game. And it's my friend Jim Mullins in Tempe, Arizona. He taught me how to play this. And he said that they call it the carrot cake game because he imagines that this is how they came up with the recipe for carrot cake, right? Somebody wanted something sweet. All they saw was like carrots. And so they're like, we're going to come up with this. And they just kind of came up with this jumbled thing together and came up with this dessert. And so what you'll do is you'll grab 6 slips of paper. They do not have to be whole sheets, right? And something to write with. So if you have like 6 small sheets of paper, and then you'll divide the 6 slips into 2 sets of 3. And then on each one of the slips of one set of 3, write one need that you have, right? Or that your community has, right? And then on the other set of 3 on each sheet, you'll write an asset, a resource, or blessing that you have, right? And so then, and this will be written down again, so you don't have to memorize this right now. But what you're going to do is one person is going to draw from their needs and another person is going to draw from their resources. And then you're going to try to think about how the resource might be able to fill the need. And so I'll give you a quick example. In one instance of the game, the need that was drawn was loneliness, right? They noticed that there was loneliness in community. And so the resource that was drawn was bicycles, right? So they began to think about ways that bicycles could help fill loneliness, right? And they came up with this thing called the bicycle gang, right? Where people began to just ride their bicycles around the neighborhoods and then They would say hello to their neighbors. They would stop and chat. They would invite others to join them if they wished. They gave out silly prizes. They did fun things. And then what they noticed was that other people who had bicycles would begin to join them on their rides. And so that's just something to think about. It's like, what are the resources that we have? What are the needs that we have? And how do we creatively use our brains, right? And there's no pressure. It's just a game, right? And so we'll take a little bit of time to do this. I am going to stop the share. And right, how was that for everyone? I'd love to hear just a little bit about, some maybe folks share about their experience.
Well, it was good fun. Our group tended to look at improvements in certain objects.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
It was
so
harder than we thought to think like
Yes.
an alien.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's right.
absolutely, Kathy. Yes.
Yeah. But the point was made because the discussion did end up getting to the thought that that was a creative change, to an object to make it better.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Or to use it differently. Yeah. Anyone else? Elaine?
Yes, I think we were open to listening to everyone's idea. Didn't matter
Yes.
whether we agreed or not. We were just open to listening.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. Because we were just being creative, right? Like we just had to hear each other out. That's a great point.
And everybody came with different assumptions of an alien, like the size or, those kinds of things.
Yeah, we had to do quite a bit of stretching of our imaginations, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
I was excited. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I was excited to hear what people were going to say, what their response was going to be.
Yeah, it's always nice to draw upon other people's experiences and what their context and where they're coming from is. Yeah, thank you. Jeff, I think you were going to share something as well.
Yeah, for us, it was very much well, what do you think it could be kind of adventure? Nobody wanted to float their opinion first, and it became a cumulative, well, that might be good, but what if it was this kind of so it was a very much a yes and kind of exercise. Yeah,
definitely. Right. I mean, there isn't space for you to say like, oh, no, that's not that at all, because we just all don't know. Right. Yeah. Great. Thank you. Well, I do want to make sure that we have at least a little bit of time to get through the second game so that we could try it. And so I just stuck it in the chat again, but just as a quick reminder, you're going to get 6 slips of paper. And on 3, you're going to write 3 needs that you have. And then on the other side, and on the other 3, you're going to write 3 blessings, resources that you have, right? And so then what you'll do is maybe you'll only have time for to go through 1 round, because I see the time that we're at 1 or 2 rounds, but then one of you will draw one of your needs and another person will draw their resources, and then you'll see how that resource might fit that need. Okay. And so hopefully that makes sense. Can we do like 10 minutes for this one, Jen?
Jeya,
yes.
That
looks
like
great. Yeah, you could do it that way, and you can even split it into 6 actual slips of paper. Normally we would play this in person, and then what you do is you collect everybody's needs, right? The ones that everyone writes down, and you shuffle it up, and then you collect everyone's resources, and then you shuffle those up, and then you just start drawing randomly. And so, but since we're doing this over Zoom, we'll do it this kind of way.
Awesome. What was the best match you guys made?
Jeff, what do you think?
Was the need for volunteers and matched with the resource of available childcare, so that we could entice volunteers with children to come and volunteer and give them a place to put their kids.
That's great.
Well, thanks, everyone.
We were having so much fun. We didn't want to leave the group.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. This is and I when I think when you can really randomize the 2 things, that's when it gets super interesting, right? Like in this moment, like through the Zoom, you kind of maybe were able to pick and choose like what, you know, like how you want to, oh, that, okay, I hear this need, well, we have this resource, right? But I like, in one of our exercises, we had like homelessness in one, right, was the need, and like hammers was like the resource that somebody came up with. And we had to like really rack our brains together, like build homes. Oh, well, you know, that feels like really huge. And we started like, you know, kind of like to start narrowing it down. It was really fun. And so hopefully this was a fun exercise to get the creativity going. It can actually be an exercise to really help form some good ideas. But really the goal is, let's just get our creative juices flowing and get the ideas out there and think about what we have versus what we don't have to fill the things that God has put in our hearts. And so we have just about 2 minutes. And what I want to do is I just want to give a couple of additional resources. And so I'm going to put that up on the screen and then I'll send this out again. But let me just share this with you real quick. All right. So here's a couple of resources. The first one is this game called Rooted Good. It's from Mission Possible. It's the Mission Possible game from Rooted Good. And it's an online game to inspire creativity and build teams. It is very similar to the carrot cake game, but it actually takes you a step further, right? And so you get to think about visioning and all that kind of stuff. And it's kind of fun. There is a cost to this game, but I wanted to let you know if you want to do it maybe with your presbytery or something like that, just a way to get creative. The next one is a book by Sharon Dallas Parks called Leadership Can Be Taught. Adaptive Leadership by Ron Heifetz is a book that is very popular. But this book takes it one step further to talk about how we can actually teach our leaders, right? Mary Ann McKibben has a book called God, Improv, and the Art of Living, and she has some great improv exercises out there. She's a pastor, and she does improv about how we can get our creative juices thinking in the ways of how we do life together, right? To get to the yes and to build with one another. The Storytelling Nonprofit by Vanessa Chase Lokshin is a book exactly about how we tell our stories. Sustaining Grace, full disclosure, I did write a chapter in this book, but this is more about building a culture of sustainability amongst new worshiping communities. Charles Lee wrote a book called Good Idea Now What? How to Move Ideas to Execution. He is the founder and CEO of a book of a group called Ideation. And so it's like, if we have a good idea, how do we get to the final product? Jen and I have been talking about this book, The Artist's Way. I know she's reading it. I am starting it. It's an excellent book, again, just to think about our creativity. And then finally, The Spirituality of Fundraising by Henry Nouwen has less to do with teams, more about how we think about fundraising. It's an excellent resource, very short if you haven't seen it. And that one, actually, I think you might be able to find on a PDF in the web somewhere. So again, these will be sent out, but I just want to share that that with you. And I just want to say again, as we come to time, thank you so much for sharing this time with me. I'm so glad that we got to spend this time together. And I'm looking forward to just other ways in which we might one day be able to spend time, whether it's in Zoom or IRL, and see one another. So thank you. And thanks, especially thanks to you, Jen, for inviting me to this space.
I just,
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
I wanted to say, Jeya, I really enjoyed this and I found it very helpful and so many ideas. So really, really found it beneficial.
Thank you, Anne. That's very kind of you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I have really enjoyed my time together too.
Have a great summer.
Huge thank you to Jeya for leading us over these 4 weeks and for all your inspiration and your wisdom, and just a reminder that the recordings are all online and the resources. So please share this with your sessions and other groups. And yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much, Jeya. And thank you all for being here.
Everyone.